Yo, yo, yo. Back at it once again. It's Sikosi of Fun Day, spitting this for you and for yours. And this right here did with the series about the Moors and stuff like that. And I got a lot of stuff on that series that, continuing on to keep it picking going. This one right here deals with science and technology in Islamic Spain. Just reading about Virk character of Toronto. It's pretty good. Pretty good article, you know what I'm saying? We don't get deep into this, and all the contributions that Moorish, just African society in general attributed. The Moors ruled Spain for nearly 8 centuries, giving it its culture of enlightenment. The many remarkable features of the Islamic Spain was one of its exquisite cultivation of sensuous pleasures with astonishing quest for learning. The capital city of Cordova was throbbing with music, its streets steeped in oriental perfume, royal palaces filled with incredible luxury. Notwithstanding this luxurious life, the houses in the city contain superb libraries of 10 to 15 for 50,000 books, and the eagerness for learning and knowledge was unmatched with any previous civilization. Spain was a region of light amidst Christian and yet benign Europe, observes Washington Irving. Eternally a warrior power of fighting for resistance, eternally a realm devoted to literature, science, and arts, where philosophy was cultivated with passion. Though wrought up in subtleties and refinement, and where luxuries of this sense were transcended by those of thought and imagination. The Almiraba, first edition, 1832, London. Page 55, 255. We must consider the facts. It was in Islamic Spain that the first human flight took place. All right, I want to piece this again. We must consider the facts. It was Islamic Spain, or Moorish Spain, where the first human flight took place. It was via Muslim Spain that the Arabic numerals, thus characters, were introduced into Europe. Paper was also introduced into Europe from Islamic Spain. The greatest library during the Middle Ages existed in Islamic Spain. The first book of the comparative religion was written here. Crystals was discovered in Cordova. The early surgical instruments were made in al-Andalus. Toothbrush and toothpaste was also invented in Islamic Spain. It was a Spanish Muslim physician who first described the real function of the retina. It was a Spanish scholar who first rejected Ptolemy's germ-testing system. It is also a Spanish Muslim physician who ascribed the contagious natures of the plague. Side note, the plague really didn't hit parts of Islamic Spain like that, because like as I said before, that's why the plague never hit it, because they already had, described, or I know what it was. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, Muslims were the torchbearers of a brilliant civilization in the world, while Europe was going through its dark ages, 5th to 10th century. For 300 years, Al-Andalus, meaning the land of the Vandals, people who ruled Spain before the Arabs, wrote a bright chapter in the intellectual history of the world. Numerous inventions, discoveries were made in Cordova that were political and intellectual center of Europe. During the Middle Ages, 1000 to 1453, Cordova was not only the jewel of the world, but the mother of all the towns in Europe. It was a favorite of moments of intellectuals to flock the seekers of science, writers, literary giants, and poets, and where composed books of unsurpassed writing. Mecca achieved its greatness by the birth of Muhammad, Medina by the success of his mission, but Cordova achieved its greatness due to its learning. It surpassed all cities of the world, a famous Muslim historian, al-Makari, date 1632, observed. In four principal features, its bridge over Guinevere, its mosque, its palace of Azir, and above all, the scientists cultivated therein. The palace mentioned in this quotation was Al-Azir, which was built by 10,000 laborers, 3,000 beasts, and a cost of 300 dinar per year. Its imperial palace could accommodate 6,000 women and 3,000 bodyguards, 3,700 bodyguards, and pages. It had 4,000 columns of marble and gold. It consisted of many palaces, a mosque, a zoo, a compound for birds, and shops for making tools. Caliphate Abdul Rahman III spent 25 years building it. There were 37 libraries in Cordova, numerous bookstores, 800 public baths, and 600 mosques. There were over 150 hospitals, 600 inns, 80,000 shops, 130,000 houses, 4,300 markets, 10,000 mansions with exquisite gardens. These mansions bore such names as the Vale of Paradise, the Garden of Wonder, the Beautiful Valley. It had a population of 1 million in 10 centuries, where now is only 100,000. Europe was deep in its slumber of ignorance. This city was a rearing of man of culture, erecting magnificent buildings, writing books, producing works of arts. There were 5,000 mills along the river grinding corn for the workers. Sidebar right here. Now this is for the future of the paper. I'm all exercises too. But corn comes from the Americas. There's no doubt corn comes from the Americas. So what is it doing in Spain around this time? You know what I'm saying? You understand what I'm trying to say? Because the Moors was already floating boats over to the Americas way before then. That corn right there with the rivers running corn for the workers, that broke it up because corn comes from the Americas. All right, let's continue on. There were 20 miles of gardens. So many flowers were planted on one hill of the closed palace that it was called Mountain of Flowers. They had a passion for cleanliness that a poor worker would rather spend his last coin on soap than on food. This was the first city in Europe to have streetlights. After sunset, a person can walk a straight line for 10 miles under the light of public lamps. Compare this to London 700 years later, where there was not one street lamp. So in the 1700s in London, there was no street lamps. And in Paris, people walked in the mud. Cordova dazzled the eyes of its inhabitants as well as the people living in the neighboring countries. A German nun, Josvita, date 1002, described the splendor of Cordova under Caliphate Abdul Rahman II in this way. In the western parts of the globe, pause right here, this is a German nun speaking that. On the western part of the globe, globes are round. So, you know what I'm saying? In 1002, they had a kind of, he's going to get more than this during the paper, but you know what I'm saying? They already knew the earth was round back then. In the western part of the globe, there is shown forth a fair ornament, a vulnerable city, fought because of its one-time might and war. A city well cultured, rich, and famous, known by the name of Cordova. It is just because of its charm and well known for all resources, especially abounding in the 7 streams of knowledge. Whenever Christian rulers needed a physician, an architect, or a dressmaker, it was Cordova they rarely turned to. The scholars were produced in such numbers that a judge of Valencia wrote a large volume entitled The History of the Learned Men in Spain. Caliphate al-Rahman, al-Hakam II, patronized the learned as he was a scholar in his own right. He founded 27 free schools in Cordova, endowed chairs in the university, inviting professors from the East. There was no one to him in the knowledge of history and biography. He himself was the author of the book History of Spain. He read and analyzed a large number of his books in the Royal Library, which considered of 400,000 books, and a catalog consisted of 44 volumes. Each volume having 20 sheets of paper containing nothing but titles and descriptions of books. It was a favorite saying in Islamic Spain that when a magician dies in Cordova, his instruments are to be sold and they are to be sent to Seville. When a rich man dies in Seville, his library is to be sold and sent to Cordova. Famous library. In the history of Islamic Spain, Caliphate al-Hakam II, 961 to 976, is fondly remembered because of his voluptuous library. Love for books came to him after his illustrious father, Caliphate Abdul Rahman III, who in fact started collecting for this library. It is that there were 400,000 volumes in this library. All the books category in 44 volumes. Al-Hakam, a bibliophile, offered exorbitant prices for new and rare books, so much so that he would give 1,000 gold denier to anyone who would bring an original copy of poetry. For instance, he sent 1,000 denier to the Iranian poet Reeves and Fani, in order to get the first copy of his composition, Copy Anagani. The library was very spacious. The bookcases were set in with wood, and the walls made of alabaster and mosaic. The floors were made of quality marble. Adjoining the room was occupied by a large number of copyists, binders, and illustrators. These copyists wrote on paper of fine quality. Staff included people of both sexes. The chief librarian was Talin, and one of the secretaries was a woman named Labana, while another woman, Fatima, was an elegant writer who traveled to distant lands in search of books. Aisha had her private library. She wrote many books and so wedded to the books that she remained single all her life. An Almoravid princess, al-Wallada, date 1072, daughter of Caliph Muhammad al-Masqif, was famous for her personal charm, wit, and poetry. Her home in Cordova was the meeting place for scholars and leading poets. She possessed all the traits of an outstanding lady. She was more like a literary woman of the 20th century. Safifa of Seville was a distinguished poet orator who also excelled in art and calligraphy. Some women distinguished themselves in various fields of science, and some entered the royal harem on the strength of their intellectual achievements. Educated women earned their living, and some preferred to have a literary career than getting married. Ashaf of Granada, date 1184, was a poet well renowned for her beauty, talents, nobility, and wealth. Her poetry, remarks famous Spanish historian al-Hakam, was like the language of the doves. When Islam was at its height of its glory, libraries were not only a symbol of learning, but also a mark of prestige. It was considered fashionable by the wealthy and the poor to have libraries in their home. Rich people, however illiterate, spared no labor or expense in amassing books. While al-Hakam Imperial Library had so many books on every known subject, surprisingly, the biggest library in Europe in the 1300s was in Canterbury, surprising of 5,000 books, and one in Cluny, France, which only had 570. Now, sidebar, the biggest library that white people had in Europe during the 1300s was in Canterbury, England, and only had 5,000 books. You know, so the next one after that was in Cluny, France, with only 500 books. One library alone in Moorish Spain, one of the bigger ones, had 400,000 books. Just think about that. You know, just really think about that, because that's just, tell you how learned the stuff we was and we thought about stuff. There were also 70 public libraries in Cordova, coffee shops, employed women, bookshops were busy as jewelers. The staff at the Royal Library included such scholars who translated Greek works into Arabic. Love of learning was infused in the people to such an extent that even slaves, poor workers, and urchins were literate. This at a time when nobles in Rome could not even write their names. The Royal Library became a symbol of Islamic civilization, attracting learned men in large numbers from the Muslim world. Both the individuals have private libraries in their mansion, where the studious can dive into the phantom sea of knowledge and bring up inestimable pearls. One wonders what became in this library. According to Professor Hemi Amir, Chamberlain Muhammad Ibn Amir decided to just burn the books on philosophy and astronomy, like Bishop Badayuma, religious scholars. Another author opines that on the 18th of December, 1499, in the orders of Queen Isabella Confessor, Cardinal Cyril's, a huge copies of the Quran and 70,000 of Islamic theological, philosophical, and scientific works were brutally burned in a public square in Granada. Now, sidebar, out of these two, the one I believe most from all my reading is the latter, where Queen Elizabeth Confessor had burned everything. This is during the Spanish Inquisition, and they have full control of the Spain. So I believe the second one to be true. I can see another Muslim just doing that. Books are also transferred to cities like Toledo, Valencia, Barcelona, and Granada after Cordoba fell in 1236. Not all was lost, though. It is estimated there's close to 250,000 Arabic manuscripts preserved in many European and Eastern libraries. The biggest collection in the university libraries of Oxford, Dunham, Cambridge, Berlin, Göttingen, Bonn, Heidelberg, Tübingen, Vienna, the Vatican, Istanbul, and the Escort Library of Madrid. The catalog of Islamic scripts in the British Museum, consisting of 2 volumes, where the catalog of the Arabic script in the Berlin Library is in 10 volumes. In North America, the biggest collection of 100,000 Islamic books is at McGill University in Montreal Library in Montreal. The manuscript collection consists of 170 volumes in Arabic, Persian, and Turkish. It's a valuable collection of 1,000 rare books printed within the calligraphy. Paper and book production. The Muslims learned that manufacturing paper from the Chinese and Samarkand in 704. The paper mills of Jatiba supplied Muslim scholars with an unlimited supply of paper. The quality of paper was so good that copies could write rapidly with great ease. It is said that nearly 70,000 books were published every year in Cordova. One copy shop employed 170 women. Wealthy people employed their own copyists. Many scholars wrote on 3 or 4 branches of knowledge and produced books by the hundreds. Al-Wallada, for instance, was not only the master of medicine, but also of other science. It is said that Kabbalah wrote 1,100 books. Ibn Hassan, 450 books. And while bin Abhan had wrote close to 400 books. Ibn al-Rajib wrote the book Kabbalah Samam, a comprehensive book on the art of medicine that consisted of 300 volumes, of which he published only 80. Majority of bookshops were housed in the booths of the main covering mosque. Booksellers were mainly copyists or calligraphers. Book decoration flourished with elaborate designs, gold lettering, and was impressed upon the book covers, which means of metal dies. Caliph Abdul-Rahman III spent hours on end discussing books with scholars. The Greek emperor sent him a copy of the famous work of Philosophes, written in gold ink on a fine parchment with pictures of the medicinal plants. A Greek monk also translated it from Greek, who assisted Hafid bin Hatshepsut. A copy of the letter from the Greek emperor is attached here. Until the Renaissance, observed Bernard Lewis, Arabic was the most translated language in the world. Both number of books translated and the number of languages translations were made. Andalusian scholars were on a wide variety of subjects of science, literature, administration, commerce, industry, drugs, arts, and military affairs. Arabic possessed an enormous amount of vivid vocabulary. Consequently, it was the preferred choice for writing. Arabic was, in fact, an international language. Its knowledge was considered a mark of culture during the Middle Ages. At the time of the conquest of Spain in 711, Latin was the language of the church and literature. The population spoke a Romance dialect, Catalan, Aragon, things of that nature. And Hebrew was the language of the Jews. Arabic, however, became lingua franca, thus unifying the Muslims and non-Muslims in Spain. From the 9th century onward, it was used for daily communication, administration, and literary expression. Writing in Arabic meant that the word gets the widest possible circulation. For 800 years, Arabic occupied the most prominent place in the world. At one time, Arabic was regarded in Europe as a language where secrets of nature were found. The educational system. In the beginning, education in Islamic Spain was deeply dependent on the Eastern tenets of Islam. During the 10th and 11th century, many Spanish Muslim scholars journeyed in the quest of specific knowledge of Egypt, Abu Sa'd, Iraq, Kamari Abd Fanas. Those are the names of the people that went to these places. Syria, and some went as far as Persia. While there, they learned everything they could in the field of medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and ophthalmology. Many scholars from the eastern land of Islam migrated to Spain for better job opportunities. For the next 2 centuries, the 12th and the 13th, was a golden period of science in Spain. Education was not stated responsibility in Islamic Spain. Let's read this again. Education was not a state responsibility in Islamic Spain. Many branches and wealthy schools, wealthy founded schools. There was a school in every village, normally attached to a mosque. The mosque served every town as a service center, educational center. Every major mosque had a library containing works of theology, philosophy, and science. Mosque was a meeting place of lecture and scientific discussion as well. Elementary education considered memorizing the Quran, while reading and writing began at home. The teacher sat with his back to the column in the mosque, while the people sat facing the floor in a ring. Students had sharp memories. Teachers provided the service for food or fixed salary. The classes were very informal. The Quran was the first textbook, and university teachers taught for a fee. Students spent 5 to 15 years in higher studies. The teachers taught unsystematically, just as you carried and often roamed from philosophy to theology to astronomy to history or to medicine. At the mosque, a student receives education in jurisprudence, grammar, lexicography, the essence of the Quran, and prophetic tradition. This training was under the seasoned teachers who were world-renowned authorities in certain disciplines. Several cities had universities such as Cordova, Seville, and Toledo, and Granada. The University of Cordova, founded by Caliph Ibn Rahman III, 912 to 961, was the most celebrated university in the world in the 10th and 11th century. It provided courses in astronomy, mathematics, medicine, history, literature, Arabic, Quran, theology, and law. There were 10,000 students enrolled in it. It was housed in the Grand Mosque of Cordova. Here were lead pipes supplied water. The university invited distinguished professors from the Islamic East to head departments. The degree from this university guaranteed a lucrative job anywhere in the country. The University of Granada was founded by Emir Yusuf Abdul Hajjaj in 1340. The building had its gates adorned by stone lions. The curriculum included medicine, chemistry, astronomy, philosophy, and theology. One administrative poet, historian Labin bin Abin Duran, 1313 to 1374, who authored about 60 books. An inscription on one main building read, "The world is supported by 4 things only: the learning of the wise, the just of the great, the prayers of the righteous, and the valor of the brave." Christian students from Castile and Oregon came here for studies. The government of the university was entrusted to a rector who was chosen among the professors. A learned Muslim, Christian, or a Jew will be appointed to this post. Annual meetings were held at the university, which the public was invited. Poems were recited by leading poets and lectures delivered by eminent teachers. Professors of theology or law wore a turban, over which a scarf was thrown called a talisman. Sometimes it was worn over the shoulders. These scarves gave rise to the European academic scarves and hoods of today. Some students from Spain traveled to Baghdad or Cairo for graduate work, just as Muslim students nowadays travel to Oxford or Harvard. Scholars from Cordova and Seville traveled to farthest corners of the Islamic domination, like Kufa, Basra, Baghdad, and Cairo, to exchange ideas. During the 18th century, 85% of the population in Europe was still illiterate, while a great majority of the population in Islamic Spain could read and write 700 years before. So let's think about that on a sidebar tip. So over 1,000 years, they was already reading and writing. But during the 18th century, 85% of the population was still illiterate. Toledo's fame. Christian students come to Islamic Spain were familiar with the beautiful streets of Toledo, Cordova, and Seville. In contrast, there was no sewers, no street lights, and no paving in London or Paris. Bathing became popular in Europe in the 14th century, and soap that was invented by the Arab got into wide use. There was money in circulation in Spain, while in Europe there was none. Minted coins were used in al-Andalus. The dinar was the gold unit, and the dirham was the silver unit. Christian rulers of the reconquest used Islamic patterns for their coins for over 200 years. The earliest gold coinage struck in Italy was called Byzantine Sarnati. Note Saracen Muslim, which Sarnati means. It bore Arabic descriptions, a Greek text from the Quran, and a reference to the Holy Prophet and a date circulated in Haracha. Toledo, once the capital of Spain, played a leading role in the transmission of scientific knowledge from Islamic Spain to Europe. It made its name through the translation of Arabic scientific works into Latin. Toledo Translation Academy, that was modeled after al-Hakam in Baghdad, 750 to 900, lasted from 1135 to 1284. There existed in the city a rich mosque, library of Arabic scientific works whose fame had penetrated far in European cities. It became a resort for eager scholars. The intellectual atmosphere of the city was just right, as there was an Arab and a mixed lineages, and there were bilingual Spanish scholars, there were foreign scholars, and there were Jews in the city who were learned in the scientific lore. Translations of a number of created things that the scientists did in those days. Translation was mainly made of literary or scientific texts. Translations were of two types: active, translation with analysis and concepts, and a passive, with a meaning of mere utterance. Translation team consisted of two men. An Arabic speaker would read the original in Arabic and then translate it aloud, word for word, in the vernacular. Then his partner wrote down the instructions to translations of each Galilean word in Latin. For example, Abu Du worked with Gaveston in translating Aben Sena di Mina. Similarly, Michael Scott worked with Ayavita, Plato Zobali, with Bar Hamad, and Gerald Osamano with the Arab gifts. The elite group of translators during the 12th century was made up of Hugh of Centella, John of Seville, Juan of Vaso, Gerald Somaza the Italian, Plato of Tavali, and Herman of the Monte German, Michael Scott, and Alec of Bab, date 1160. The Holy Quran was translated here into Latin in 1142 by teams of translators consisting of 4 Christians and 1 Muslim. These scholars were not mere translators, they were in fact pioneers of the European Renaissance. Early translations of those of mathematics, astrology, medicine, psychology, logic, and philosophy, translations were made faithful. Every word in the Arabic original found some Latin words corresponding to it. For instance, dual matter, of course, mother, the tough membrane developing the brain. Pia matter, the thin mother, or the thin membrane covering the brain. When difficulties arose with translation of technical words, in such cases, words were translated from Arabic, or sometimes Arabic words were taken over as they stood, and Latinized. An Englishman named Robert O. Chester translated in 1145 Al-Wajari Yawama of Kawazan. Arabic numerals were introduced into Europe for Toledo after a Latin translation, thus giving a new word, algorithm. The Spanish Gazal, which is a corruption of his surname. Al-Abad arrived here in 1126 and translated into Latin astronomical tables of the Amorated. Michael Scott, date 1235, translated the works of Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd. Gerald of Cremona, 1187, was equivalent to Ibn Ashak, 809 to 877, who translated 71 Arabic works into Latin. The effects of this intellectual activity was that it revolutionized the thinking of European nations and sharpened their wits. On the sterile soil of Europe, it planted seeds of learning. It also paved the way for the founding of universities in several cities in the 12th centuries, i.e. the University of Salerno and Bologna in Italy, Paris and Montpellier in France, Oxford in England. It worked to spark and unite a flame of knowledge that had been dimmed after 600 years of burning. By the end of the 13th century, Europe had acquired from Islamic Spain all it could, and well on its way to the path of the Renaissance in the 14th century. Scholars of fame. Islamic Spain produced eminent scholars in many fields: astronomy, al-Bujan, al-Zagrar, al-Fab, and al-Mita; in medicine, al-Benzuri and al-Zakari; in philosophy, Ibn Baha, Ibn Tawfer, and Ibn Rushd; lexicon, history, and geography, Albuquerque; and in botany, al-Battar. Illustrious scholars were interested in these subjects mainly because of religious significance. Mathematics was needed to figure out inheritance and distance between town, prices of commodity. Astronomy was required to determine the position of the Kaaba for any place in the world. Timing and prescribed layers of prescribed prayers and seasons. Medicine was needed for the preservation of health and the purity of the soul. There were several authorities in the lives of Spain. Zakaria worked on his Toledan tablets in Toledo. Jabir ibn Afah used the minaret of the Grand Mosque of Seville as an observatory. Ibn Baha in his private observatory. The Gila Tower of Seville was completed in 1198 after 25 years of elaborate design and construction work. It's 300 feet tall with a base of 300 square feet. There is no stairs, no ramps, so one can go to the top on the back of a horse. It has 7 rooms corresponding to the 7 planets. Subsequently, it was converted into a belfry. It still dominates the city. The writer visited the tower in August 1999, which flocked with thousands of tourists. Thousands of years ago, knowledge was not compartmentalized as today. A mathematician could be a philosopher and a musician, while a poet can be a physician and a philosopher. Physics, mathematics, astronomy were closely tied. If a scholar wrote on one of these, he wrote on the other as well. A number of scientists did their research in a number of fields and will be evidence to the following list. Ahmad ibn Anas. He was the first physician of Islamic Spain who lived on the Emir of Muhammad, 852-886. Abbas ibn Furness, 887. He was a poet, laureate, and an astrologer of the Emirs Imam Rahman II and Muhammad I. He is famous by virtue of his ability to make new inventions. He brought from Baghdad the tables of Sinhan, which greatly influenced the development of astronomy in Europe. He was the first in history who made a scientific attempt at flying. His flying equipment consists of a suit of feathers with wings, which carried him a distance in the air. When he alighted, he hurt himself because the suit did not have a tail. He introduced Oriental music into Spain. He constructed his home, a planetarium, a clock, and an honorary spear. He is credited with the discovery of rock crystal. He introduced crystal cutting technique into Spain. Ibn Abdul Rabini, 860 to 8940, of Cordova, was a laureate of the Emir Abdul Rahman III. His book, Abir al-Rifas, the Unique Necklace, is considered to be the first literary history of Islamic Spain. His nephew, Sahid Abdul Rabini, was a physician poet. Rabbi Ibn Zayd al-Yusuf, 961, was the bishop of Cordova under Emir al-Hakam II. He wrote mainly in Arabic. He produced numerous astronomical treatises and dedicated a calendar to the so-called Kabbalah of Caliph Irene II. Joseph the Wise, 984, wrote a treatise on multiplication and division. Hasdai ibn Shafru, 990. He refers to the court of Al-Hakam II and Al-Rahman II and Hakim II. He was the court physician of both these emirs. He translated Greek works into Arabic and was a great patron of the sciences. He discovered the panacea called the fruit the best. When the Greek Emperor Constantine VII sent a gift of the ancient manuscript, Material Medicine by Dorces, the Caliphate Imam Rahman III, Hassan was one of 400 translators, 1 Greek-speaking Arab and 5 Spanish, who assisted the Greek monk Nicholas into translating. He wrote a letter to the king of the Khazars describing Islamic Spain. So this is the guy right here that's in Judaism to the Khazars, or the so-called Jews that run Israel today. He the one that gave them their religion. Well, help give them their religion. Yahya Azbin Iraq served as physician and advisor at the court of Emir Abdul Rahman III, 912 to 961. He authored medical works in 5 volumes. Masalan Abdin Ahmad al-Majini, date 1007, was born in Madrid, but flourished in Cordoba, where he established a school in which future scholars like Ibn Kamal and al-Zakaria studied. He was the first astronomer, mathematician of al-Andalus. He edited and corrected the planetary tables of Zakaria, wrote a treatise on an astrolabe, on a commentary of Ptolemy's plain spear, a book of commercial arithmetic, al-Iraq, and a book on the generation of animals. His famous disciples were al-Kabini, 1060, and al-Shaman and al-Safir. He mentioned the exotic power of amical numbers. In chemistry, he wrote 2 books, The Ganalon Aims of the Wise, and Babul Hakim, The Sage Step. The first book was translated into Latin under the title Pretrix in 1252 by the Order of King of Fonts of the Wise. It remains a mainstay of the chemistry literature in Europe for many years. Alder the Bath translated his astronomical tablets in Latin in 1126. He was the first person who introduced the study of the sciences, especially mathematics and chemistry in Islamic Spain. Among his horrific title was Al-Habib, the mathematician, where he was considered a leader in this field. His book, Kabin Amir, was translated by Michael Scott in 1217, while John Seville translated his treatise on our astrolabe. Masalam created schools of astronomers consisting of his students and their students, marking the beginning of a science of organized activity in Islamic Spain. All his students immersed themselves in the work of al-Khazami, all coming into use of the astrolabe in Zala Azini. Quasi Shahid al-Andalus, 1026 to 1079, in this book, Talak Arman describes Ismaili as the leader of mathematics in Andalusia in his time, and no one before him was more learned in astronomy. He was a capable observer of the stars and filled a desire to understand the book of Ptolemy, known as Amagas. He produced distinguished students such as no other experience than Amalus produced. Al-Ben Ashakar, 1009, Lanagasar. He flourished in Gowan tours, and he was famous physician. His popular book, Za'amari, Traveler's Revision, was translated to Greek, Hebrew, and into Latin by Constantine Africanus. It contained a remarkable description of smallpox and measles. He also wrote on the cause of the plague in Egypt. His book, Kavavin Fi Al-Zarin, a reliable and simple drug, was translated into Latin in 1230. Abin al-Quintan, 977. He was born in Seville and made his home in Cordova. He was a famous historian and grammarian. His Terrain al-Lewis, The History of Islamic Spain, deals with the Muslim conquest to 893, while his Tarak al-Lewis extended the Muslim conquest to the reign of Emir Rahman III. His work on the conjunctions of Arabic verses in the Tabak al-Zarim was the first treatise ever composed on the subject. Menahem ben Shari. He was a famous philosopher, and his main work was a dictionary of biblical language, the first complete dictionary of its kind. It contained grammatical remarks and other philosophical information. Abdul Zakaria Yawa Abdin Doan, 1095 and 1165. He was born in Toledo, but flourished in Cordova. He was the father of scientific Hebrew grammar. He wrote in Arabic and his grammar was based on Arabic grammar. To this day, the technique terms of Hebrew grammar are translations corresponding to Arabic terms. The translation only Gerald excelled him. He produced translations of a host of astronomical works of Abu Masr, Sabit Ibn Quran, Masalala, and al-Farghani. Turkish writers, Abu Fay was his contemporary. He translated his on the origin of the science and the division of philosophy. He collaborated with Denevaz in various translations. For instance, he turned Abu Sina on the soul into Spanish and Gavini turned it into Latin. Ibn Saddin al-Bakuri, 976. He flourished at Cordoba at the court of the Emir Abu Radwan III and Hakim III. He was a famous historian and physician. He wrote a chronicle of Muslim Spain in Africa. He also wrote a treatise on gynecology and the hygiene of pregnant women and infants on obstetricians. And a calendar. The book he got on obstetricians is Al-Jin Janikin, Creation of an Embryo. You already knew it was an embryo, 964 in the calendar. Hassan ibn Julian, 944 to 946. This medical historian was born in Cordoba. At age 14, he became deeply interested in medicine. At age 24, he was the lead physician on duels. He composed a commentary to the name of simple drugs given at the Marti Medicina of Dorsius, a treatise on drugs not missing by Dorsius, including some of those found in Spain. His work on antidotes and one of the mistakes of physicians. He was a physician to Caliphate Hashim II. He wrote the history of physicians and philosophers of his time in Spain. Tariq Abu Ramos, The History of Physicians and Wise Men, which is the oldest summary in Arabic on the history of medicine, contains 57 biographies, 31 of those of Oriental authors, the rest are African and Spanish scholars. The medicine was a contribution of Tafaz, Amiz al-Rani, and Manakwala al-Fuzan. Can you say that? He corrected and wrote the commentary on a famous translation made by Ben Hasseb Ben Shesfu. The following is from his book, Taba Kawalafi. There's an active story about Hippocrates, which we would like to mention in order to show his great virtue. Alpha stated that the physiognomy that can be inferred into a man's character from the Constitution. One day, Hippocrates' pupils assembled and discussed what they knew of any contemporaries are more virtuous than the virtuous Hippocrates. They could name none. And somebody had an idea of testing Hippocrates on the claim of advancing of a framework regarding physiology. There was a picture of Hippocrates painted and brought to fulfillment and asked him politely to look at the individual portrayed and deduce his character from this constitution. He looked at and compared the individual parts of the body from one another and pronounced his verdict as follows. Here's the man here loves fornication. Fire, they said, that's a portrait of the wise Hippocrates. Yet, the fellow insisted that his science must be true and asked him, yourself, he said, the man will not agree to an untruth. Thereupon, they again went to Hippocrates and told him the story of what they had done and what a fine had told him. And Hippocrates replied, a friend is right. I love fornication, but I control myself. I've been out of his fire, date 1030. He flourished at Cordoba and retired at Dina. He was a mathematician and astronomer. He wrote a treatise on the astrolabe and compiled astronomical tables. His treatise on the astrolabe, the Ben al-Amin Bil Astrolabe, was translated by Plato of Ptolemy, later translated into Hebrew as well. His father was a coppersmith. Abdel Wa'id, 1008 to 1075. He was a physician at Cordoba who composed a treatise on simple drugs, Tabu al-Ari Rafam, which he composed in 20 years, and based on the treatise of Beniology. Gerald of Simona translated his treatise under the title Liber Medicinae Simplicium and printed it in Strasbourg in 1531, Vienna in 1558. Sir Thomas Arms said the Latin translation was printed some 50 or more times. His book, Kabal Aras, The Book of the Pillow, was translated by Judah ben Nathan. He also worked on almographical work, Malan Aflan, in his book, Kabal Rashis, The Guide to Medicine, his manual of therapeutics. His other noteworthy were Mahab Tuveen, The Experience of Medicine, and Tariq Nasser, The Treatment of the LI Ailments, and Kenneth McGraw, The Book of Assistance. At the demand of the King of Toledo, he planted a botanical garden in the king's orchard. Ibn Haran, 988 to 1076. He lived in Cordova, which was the earliest writer of Islamic Spain. He wrote 50 books, one of which is the Colossal History of Spain, al-Matin, comprised of 60 volumes. Only one book, Ibn Haras by Tarek al-Ariel's biography of Muslim scholars of Spain, in 10 volumes has survived. It was published in Paris in 1937. Adi Faradi, 1062 to 1031. He was born in Cordova, where he was taught. After his pilgrimage to Mecca, he was appointed Qadi of Basina. Only one of his books, Tariq al-Andalus, was published in Madrid in 1891 by F. Cordim. Ahmad bin Muhammad al-Razi, 936, was the earliest historian whose works have been transmitted to us. The Spaniards called him El Constable Excelente. His book on history is available in the Castilian giving Muslim conquest to Spain, Rhodes, Providence, and city of al-Aruz. His ancestors came from Spain, from Iran. Abdul Qasim al-Ghazari, 936 to 1013. He was the greatest surgeon and physician, pharmacist, and psychiatrist of the Middle Age. He lived in Zara, near Cordova, hence his last name. His literary contribution, Kabal al-Taris, is a medical encyclopedia of 30 treasuries. It was completed in AD 1000, after 50 years of medical practice. In it, he discussed surgery, pharmacy, material medicine, cookery, diuretics, weights, therapeutics, psychotherapy. He described cataract operations and preparing drugs for its elimination and dissertation. The surgical part of the book attaches more importance to the cauterization and the septics. Some sections are devoted to obstetrician and surgical treatment of the eyes, ears, and teeth. It contains a diagram of more than 30 surgical instruments invented by him. He described amputation, dental surgery, wound treatment, crushing stones in the bladder, dissection, bisection, and fractures. He was the first person to give a description of hemophilia and used silk thread for stitching wounds. He prepared teeth from animal bones, laying the foundation for orthodontics. He prepared instruments for internal examination of the ear and inspection of the urethra. Gerald of Simona, 1114 to 1187, translated Errol al-Taris into Latin as Liberal Service. The first edition of surgery was published in Venice in 1497. The medical part in 1596, Augsburg. Chapter dealing with female diseases was published in 1566, then at Strasbourg in 1596. The Arabic text, along with the Latin edition of John Channing, published at Oxford in 1778. The French edition, Paris, 1861. The English edition, Advocates on Surgery and Instruments by M.S. Pink, London, 1973. He says, time plays an important part in treatment and cure of the disease. He devised new operative forceps. His illustration of surgical instruments are best known and intended for medical use. He divided man's lifespan into 4 stages: early age to 20, youth to 40, maturity to 60, and old age over 60. He asserted the brain included 3 functions of intellect: imagination, thought, and memory. His writings is highly regarded in Europe until the 13th century. Tasawwuf is a part of the medical curriculum in many universities. Albin al-Miraj, 1040. He was born in Cordova. His main work in Australia was Kabir al-Bimir al-Kunum, the function of the stars, which is translated to Castilian and then to Latin into Venice in 1485. Moved to Tunis in later life. Al-Mensadi, 1070 to 1095, was born blind in Marseille and died in Nîmes. He was a lexicographer, philosopher, and a philologist, author of the great Arabic dictionary Al-Muqas, which is alphabetically arranged. Another marvelous dictionary, Al-Bakar al-Ring Moet Azam, was arranged by the subject matter: horses, camels, birds, food, women. He gave all the terms known to him and had a fantastic memory. Ajayani, 990 to 1097, was born in Cordova. He excelled in mathematics and astronomy. He wrote Monaco Savarif ratios and a treaty of the total solar eclipse, which is an eclipse that occurred on July 1st, 1079 in Spain. This was translated to Hebrew in 1335, and another work on the dawn was translated by Gerald von Samona. His books on astronomical tablets, Jin Jang, contains instructions for determining the time of day, direction of prayer, the calendar, visibility of the new moon. Another work on astronomy was Master Shada Kazin, the protection of the rays and stars. In mathematics, he wrote Kaban, math determination of the magnitude of the acres on the surface of the sphere, which is available in the Escorial Library. Abu Shakar, Abu Ashraf Zakari, 1026, 15th October, 1087. He was the foremost astronomical observer of his age. He was called al-Nasquash, which means in the engraver. He lived in Cordova. His main dexterity led him to the service of al-Bin al-Sassid of Toledo as a maker of precious instruments. He constructed water clocks of Toledo, which were in use until 1133. These clocks constitute a precise lunar calendar, and which is the predecessor to the clocks that became fashionable in 17th century Europe. He constructed an astrolabe, actually for observing the sun movements. It can be seen at the Fabra Observatory in Barcelona. An Arabic treaty on this astrolabe demonstrated that Zakaria anticipated Kepler and stated that the orbits were elliptical. The Arabic text states that the orbit of Mercury is badai, or oval, in the same way Kepler dealt with Mars in its Astronomer Nova. Polish scientist Copernicus, 1473 to 1543, quoted him in expressing his intellectual indebtedness to him in his book, Die Revolution der Kommission. His astronomical observations were of great value to Copernicus in devising the Henley Central System. Interestingly, this Arabic text was instrumental in the creation of a new type of technical literature. He edited the Toledan tablets, planetary tablets based on observation made by him and a group of astronomers of Toledo. These tablets are translated to Latin by Gerald of Samona. Sidebar, Gerald of Samona is everywhere that's copying stuff. And enjoyed much popularity in Europe. It is estimated that 48 of these manuscripts of these tables are preserved in European universities in Arabic and Latin. His treatise, Rules on the Use of Letters on the Table, 1070, was also translated by Gerald entitled Canons. These introductions of trigonometry tables explains their constructions. It was printed from Nuremberg in 1534. He was the first person to calculate the sun topology with reference to the stars, as Copernicus later acknowledged in his writings. He wrote a treatise on the movement of fixed stars. In Toledo, one of the marks of the city was a scientific invention called the Mansion of the Hours. Azaling directed his workers to make two large reservoirs, three automatic machines that took 14 days to fill, then 14 days to empty. So they followed the phases of the moon. The machinery was really cleverly constructed so that if the water poured beyond the required quantity, it was automatically removed. He built a clock that could turn the hour of the day and night in the days of the lunar month. The surface area of the moon, Mary November, the Sea of Clouds, is named after him. So this guy right here, who Copernicus gave studies to, and got the area of the moon named after him, was a Moor in Spain. Now we talked about Abu Shashak Azakar was a Moor in Spain during this time. Ibn Jabir, the original writer poet, that was born in Magdala. He was the earliest philosopher of Spain. Some even call him the Jewish Plato. His philosophical works exerted a deep influence on Duns Scott. Gervasi revered his book, Yama Ahmad, the Fountain of Life, into Latin. In collaboration with Abu Dawud in 1150, his other works were Mata Arazar, on the improvement of moral qualities, was printed in New York in 1902. Al-Hakam, 1066. He was born in Mendoza and died in Saragossa, which is in Sicily or Italy, at the age of 90. He received his education in Hakan, Iraq, now in Turkey. He excelled in mathematics and surgery. He was a disciple of Malam al-Riq, and it was he who introduced the writings of the Brethren of the Purity into Spain. Ibn Ahmad, 1035. He flourished at Granada and was a famous mathematician and astronomer. His book, Al-Mahmad, was one of the commercial arithmetic, while Ibn al-Hari is on mental calculus and the nature of numbers. He wrote 2 books on geometry, 2 on astrolabe, and it was used in constructions. The main work of compilation of the astrolabe tablicles, or astronomical tablicles. His Z was a good master, was good, and his master was Amarantus. Al-Bukhari, 1010 to 1094. He was a renowned geographer and painter of the 11th century who flourished in Cordova. He was a man of wide-ranging knowledge, a good poet, and a philanthropist. His book, Al-Ras Malagik, the book on the roads in the kingdom, was an astounding work of geography. The same published in Algiers in 857. The book was influenced in Arabic literature for centuries. He also wrote a dictionary on the ancient geography of Arabia. This dictionary was edited by the renowned German scholar Mansfield Gottenham in 876. A book on principal plants and trees and lawns is ascribed to him. Sahih al-Andalus, 1029, June 16 to 1070. He was born at Merida and later judged in Toledo. His famed work rests on the history of the science entitled Abaquat Yuman, the Classification of Nations. It is extensively used by historians of science. Al-Abaquat was a short-lived survey of 11th century nations who cultivated knowledge. He lists Northern Europeans in the 3rd category of nations that cultivated science. He had a low opinion of their mental traits as well as their physical features. He also wrote a history of learned men, both Muslim and barbarians, and a treatise on astronomy. He was a great observer, and his observation was great value to Azarin. The following is an excerpt from the Talon Yamam, the French translation by R. Blanchard, Paris, 1935. The Arabic text was edited by L. Shinko in 1911. The 4th nation, after the Indians, Persians, and Chaldeans, that of the Greek possessed a great importance among the people and was very famous in all regions. The language of the Greeks, Yama, is called Greek. It is one of the richest and most important languages in the world. As to their religion, the Greeks are usually Sabians. That is, they worship the stars and idolaters. Their scholars are used to be called philosophers, or philosopher, meaning in Greek, a friend of wisdom. Greek philosophers belong to the highest class of human beings and to the greatest scholars, since they show the genuine interest of all branches of wisdom, mathematics, logic, natural science, metaphysical, and as well as economics and politics. The Greeks consider 5 of their astronomers to be the most important: The earliest among them is umfundisi. After him, following in order, Pythagoras, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, the son of Nicodemus. And that's from the Classical Heritage in Islam. Excuse me, the Classical Heritage of Islam by Frank Rosenthal, page 38, 1975. Ibn Hadim, 994 to 1064. He was one of the most original thinkers and elegant writers, poet, and biographer. The most prominent scholar in the 11th century. He wrote 400 books on a wide variety of treatises of subjects: theology, law, tradition, history, and comparative religion. His fame rests in the works of al-Mustafa al-Salman, the decisive word of sex and domination, in which he treated Islam, Judaism, Christianity, and Zoroastrianism. This was the first book on the comparative religions in the world. His prose work, Al-Tama Hamada, The Ring of the Dove, which is about love and lovers with interesting anecdotes. It's composed in elegant verses and is preserved in a stringal manuscript at Leiden. It is written in Geneva while he was in prison. Another treatise, now when it still is an existent manuscript in Munich. In genealogy, he wrote Kaba Ama Mashir, which details the genealogy of Arab and Berber tribes. About 36 of his works are still existent. He wrote an epistle defending al-Andalus against the charges of neglecting the biography of his intellectuals. He had a sharp tongue and therefore made many enemies. He held some political appointments, but politics was not his cup of tea. In his writing, his tone was fanatical. He did not show respect to personalities of the past. His character became a proverb in literary characters. Sharp as a sword of a band in the pen and marine. This resulted in his books being banned and was seldom quoted. He was charged for heresy, and his books were publicly burned in Seville on orders of Emil Amantuan. He was eventually shunned by students. Other of his books about, and one of his famous quotes is, "My only desire in seeking knowledge was to retain a high scientific ranking in the world, in this world, and the next." The following excerpt is a book from Muhammad, the Arabic edition, Cairo, 1954. At all times, in all nations everywhere, the scientists have been divided into 7 parts. The first 3 are the science of religious law as possessed by every nation, the history of the nation concerned, and the science of the language it speaks. The various nations all differ from one another in aspects of these 3 sciences. The remaining 4 sciences, however, are the same everywhere, namely astronomy, arithmetic, medicine that is concerned in the human body, and philosophy. Medicine falls in 2 parts, namely the medicine of the soul and medicine of the body. The medicine of the soul is prepared by logic to remove excess and deficiency in ethical manners and observe the right means, hereby leading to a moral improvement. Medicine of the body deals with the humors of the body and the composition of the limbs as well as illness, their causes, and the medicine which can be fought in the section of effective medicines and foods. Classical Heritage of Islam, page 58. Abdul Amir, 1073. He first is a bill, and his treaty on agriculture in Iran was extremely sufficiently used by Ibn Iran. He's a grammarian, as well as a botanist. Abu Hanifa was the celebrated Andalus philosopher, born in Saratoga. His skills and practice of mathematical science, particularly astronomy and music. He was adept in medicine also. He was a Virk Quran. Ibn Kavi has described him as the last philosopher of Islamic Spain. He composed several works in Seville on 1118 and one of his books of logic in the Esper Library. Then he moved to Fez, where he became a minister to Yah bin Yusuf Talmin for 20 years. He died in 1146 by poison in Fez, Morocco, administered to him by the instigation of a jealous physician. Material want and intellectual isolation weighed down his spirits. His original treatise in the exhortation of Aristotle, he required proficiency in science, music, poetry early in his youth. The governor of Saragossa was so much impressed with his verses that he vowed to Ibn that he should walk on gold when entering his royal court. I was then assented to his wish and put a gold coin in each of his shoes. His most famous philosophical work, On the Soul, The Regiment of Solidarity, and The Farewell Letter. On logic, he wrote a treaty on astronomy, and in medicine, he wrote the Compound on Wisdom and the commentary on Wafir and books. A summary on Azari, Kamaran Kaming Azi. The Farewell Letter was translated into Hebrew and a manuscript preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale of Paris. He also authored a book on plants, Kabbalah Navat, and Ibn Tullis, who was his disciple, inspired him in certain works. His treatise on music was much appreciated in the West, as others in the East. He played Abu Yu and invented many musical tunes, which is popular in al-Andalus. Long before Galileo and Newton, Islamic formulated a theory of motion. Let me read this again. Long before Galileo and Newton, Islamic formulated a theory of motion. Speed of moving body is equal to the moving force, less than environmental resistance. Let's read it again. The speed of moving body is equal to the moving force, less than the environmental resistance. He also put forth this thesis. The force that caused a fruit to fall from the tree is the very same force that moves the celestial bodies. In astronomy, he rejected the theory of epic cycles, which began incompatible with physical doctrine. Thus, it seems to have been initiated a contingency to reject and replace the autonomic system. His criticism of geocentric views inspired Copernicus to form his heliocentric theory. His commentaries on Aristotle's physics and zoology and other works made him the best Aristotelian philosopher in Islamic Spain. One of his sayings is, "Thought is man's highest function. By thought, man attains knowledge of and union with God." One more time. One of his famous sayings, "Thought is man's highest function, and by thought, man attains knowledge of and union with God." Yusuf al-Matin, 1081 to 1085. He was king of Saragossa and a great pioneer of science. His father, Amin Abu-Bakr, 1046 to 1081, was also a partner of the students. Pause right there. Now, I know people confused, like, how is there Muslim kings up here running Italy? We don't get into that because Moorish Spain wasn't the only spot popping. You know what I'm saying? The university I named Bologna and all that stuff, Valencia, those were founded by Moors. And they had a bunch of them on Sicily. We all come to find out later on. Not in this video. Yusuf wrote a mathematical treatise, the instrument, the bringing of perfection, which is said to be studied together with Euclid, the Amicus. No copy of this treatise is preserved. Ibn Basim, 1147. He composed a literary history of Spain, Doctor of the Treasury, which is a treasure house of literary information. His contemporary, Ibn Anquan, produced two literary histories, both were distinguished for their forceful style. Abraham Bar-Haytham. He flourished in Barcelona around 1136. He wrote a number of Hebrew books in mathematics, astronomy, and calendar. His most important work is on the practical geometry translation into Latin in 1145 by Plato Tivoli as Liber al-Mar. This is the first Hebrew translated text and probably the first trigonometry book in the West. It was the first early expedition of Arab algebra in Europe. The Arabic he was known as Sherbek Asada, the elder of the royal suit, perhaps because this was his official title. In his time in Barcelona was the hub of Arabic learning and active in translating masterpieces of Arabic science. He also was the author of Mathematical Encyclopedia. He played an important role in the creation of the science in Hebrew. He produced a set of astronomical tablets, the tablets of the prince, a MS in Latin at the University of Cambridge. He helped in the translation of Arabic scientific works, i.e., he helped work with Plato of Tivoli, the translated Albana book in Latin, De Montu Science Terresum. Ibn bin Abdul Aziz al-Sabat, the 12th century. He was an legitimate physician and astronomer in the court of the king of Spain. He wrote philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, pharmacology, music, and medicine. He prepared a summary of Euclid's elements. All his books are listed in the top of the leaf. His treatise on music was translated into Hebrew by Abraham Bar Feifel. His book, Kabbalah al-Rami Mafal, was translated to Latin in 1260 by Villanova. For a while, he lived in 1120 in Cairo in Alexandria, where he was thrown in jail due to his failure to remove a sunken ship from the sea. He wrote a treatise on Mazarin, which he described the archaeology of Egypt. Famous physicians, astrologers, and poets he met during his sojourn there. He died in Spain. Some of his verses was engraved in his tombstone as he desired. Jabir ibn Lafifah, 1150. He was a famous astronomer, mathematician, 12th century, who lived in Seville. His masterpiece, Asha al-Mamasi, Correction on Gas, the Arabic manuscript, which is preserved in the Berlin Library. Gerardo Coloma, translated into Latin. It was translated to Hebrew in 1247 by Moses ibn Tabam. He criticized Ptolemy violently on many astronomical matters. He listed the errors in the Provolog. He placed Venus and Mercury above the sun as opposed to Ptolemy. His name was used in Europe as one who criticized Ptolemy. Arabic MS or Isaiah was preserved in the Ashra Library near Madrid, and in Hebrew at the Bodleian Library, Oxford. He used the minaret, Lagar, and the Grand Mosque of Seville for his astronomical observation. His influence was greatly felt in the West. Many writers cite him in their books of Monotonous and Deconus in 1460. Took the core of the fourth book of his treatise from the Bible without acknowledgement. The Brennan called him the Angranus Calamity of Ptolemy. In his book, the Book of Astronomy, contains a chapter on spherical trigonometry, which made a significant contribution to European trigonometry. Michael Scott, 1234, translated the Latin, this book into Latin, the Astronomy Libra, and another title, Astronomer, printed in Nuremberg, 534. The astronomy theory was introduced into Spain through Astronomy. A PhD dissertation, Jabrani's influence in the West by R.P. Laporte, was submitted to Manchester University, UK in 1970. Al-Ghazali, a physician in Cordova, whose interest was in botany. His book on the collection of plants in Spain, North Africa, was considered most accurate and precise in the classical Arab literature. Al-Wasan refrains the names of the plants in Arabic, Latin, and Berber. Abraham ben Zara, 1092 to 1164. He was a famous Jewish grammarian, poet, philosopher, and exegete. He was a distinguished Bible commentator who translated Albanian commentary on Al-Zoran, Aziz-Ahin, and medical tablets. His wanderings in various countries, Egypt, Italy, France, and England, did not hinder the composing of scientific works. He was the first Spanish to write in Hebrew. His famous works of Safa al-Mapasmo, while keeping Hamamas, the copper instrument, is on the astrolabe. He wrote 3 works on arithmetic and on 3 theories of numbers in addition to preparing astronomical tablets. Abdul Hamid Gharati, 1080 to 1169. He was an intelligent geographer, loved traveling to distant lands. He immigrated to Egypt, visited Baghdad, Persia, and went up the Volga River. The River Volga. He wrote 2 books, Mama al-Abin, the Archaeology of the Marvels of the Maghreb, and Taba al-Bin, Gift from the Heart. The book contained a long dissertation on astronomical and astrological matters, besides describing some of the marvels of Islamic Spain. The book also contained the oldest description of skis used by people in the Arctic, complete with diagrams. Description of flora and fauna of northern Russia is also of interest. So this guy right here, he went way deep into Russia, went to Lapland. You know what I'm saying? And gathered up information. Abdul Wadada address, 10,000 to 1166. It's a long time. That must be a typo. He was born in Cartagena but received his education in Cordoba. After visiting Spain, North Africa, and Asia Minor, he settled in Sicily. Sidebar, the Moors had Sicily too. Like I said, we'll get into that. They had Sicily just like they had Spain. Big universities. He was the greatest geographer of the Middle Ages. For the king of Sicily, Roger II, 1130 to 1154, he made a celestial gold with a dish-shaped map in silver showing the 7 zones of the world. Let me repeat this one more time because, like I said before, the Moors was already traveling to what's called the New World of the Americas. For the king of Sicily, Roger II, 1130 to 1154, he made a celestial globe. A globe is a circle, all you flat earth people, and a dish-shaped map in silver showing 7 time zones of the world. He was commissioned by the king to write geography of the world. This work is entitled Nurat al-Malak or the Book of Roger. It was illustrated with 70 maps. He did this work at Palermo, which is in Sicily. A aforementioned book shows the grasp for such fundamental facts such as the sphericity or the roundness of the earth. This doctrine was crucial to the discovery of America. A synopsis of the text of 71 maps was printed in Rome in 1592. Partial editions of the text have been made in London, Rome, and Bonn. Abu Bakr al-Zinzar, 1097 to 1162. He was born in Seville, where he became a court physician at the Caliphate Amar Ramines, 1163. He belonged to a family of gifted scholars, advisors, and generations of physicians. He dedicated 2 of his treatises to the medicine and ring, and another one on diet to the Emir Ma'in. He dedicated his book, Al-Tari, to a happy to his physician's son, who had took care of his patient while he was away. The book deals with fears, therapeutics, and careful use of laxative. He publishes a pharmacopoeia for students in Cordoba. He developed many original ideas. He discussed the value of good diets, antidotes against poison, use of asparagus in treating the sick, tumors, paralysis of the pharynx, scabies, and inflammation of the middle ear. He also recommended artificial feeding through the rectum, use of cold water to reduce fever, and the use of clean air for health. His other books, Kidney Disease, Leprosy and Vertigo, and the Treatment of Disease, and The Secret Art of Healing, a copy is available at the National Library of Morocco. In the 14th century, MS of Al-Azhar is stored at the Zurian Library in Istanbul. He authored 6 medical books, the most valuable being his Matters Authors, the 10 and 30 treatises written on behest of a friend, Abu Rush, who copied it. In College, Abu Rush described him as the greatest physician since Galen. He was the first person to discuss his feeling in bones and gave a clear description of an itchmite. Gerald of Simone translated into Latin and published 1280 entitled Tacit, which is used as a textbook at medical universities of Montpellier and Bologna. Abu Abdin Tufir, 1105 to 1185. He was born in the town of Donex and died in Morocco. He is also known by the name of Abu Jafar. He was fond of books and a man. He read all the books available in the Caliphate Library. He was given the contemplative enjoyment than scientific work. He was an outstanding physician, mathematician, and philosopher. He was a pupil of Ibn Baha, which composed verses, but wrote very rarely. He was active and engaged in medicine and politics during his stay in Granada. He was appointed judge and minister of Seville, and later became the personal physician of Caliphate al-Rasul Yusuf, 1163 to 1184. He attracted leading scholars of Andalus to the royal court. Abu Rush was one of them. On his advice, Abu Rush became interested in Aristotle's works. His masterpiece, Abu Yabin, the Living One, Son of the Awake, earned him a niche in the temple of universal literature. It is one of the most remarkable works of the Middle Ages. In 1349, it was translated into Hebrew with a commentary. The The Arabic text of land translation by E. Virk was published in Oxford in 1671. G. Keith rendered it into English in 674. The Arabic original has been frequently published from Cairo and Istanbul. It has been translated to Spanish, Dutch, German, Urdu, and Russian. Also, it has been suggested that the original of the Daniel Defoe Robinson Crusoe written in 1719 was this book. German philosopher Leibniz knew what Taillefer through Latin translation of the book. Ibn Nafis, 1288, the Syrian doctor who gave the earliest known account of pulmonary blood circulation, wrote a counterpart to Valentine Rapin, died in Morocco. Nur ad-Din al-Bedr, date 1204. He was a leading astronomer of his time. Born in Morocco, migrated to Spain, and settled in Seville. As an able pupil of Ben Tolifa, he had original ideas on the movement of the planet. He put forth a theory regarding the movement of the stars in his book of Form, which is translated into Latin, De Morbis Summa Syllabus, by Michael Scott in 1270 at Toledo, reprinted in Berkeley in 1952. His theory of motion was introduced to Europe through his Latin version. This was later translated into Hebrew by Moses Ibn Teppan and printed in Vienna in 1531. Alvin did not trust the human senses, and given the distance between the observer and the spirits, put his faith in human reason. His astronomical system exerted deep influence on European scholars of the 13th century, down to the time of Copernicus, 1473 to 1543, and Gauguin's the date of 1253, and referred in his works, even plagiarizing from it in his refutation of the planetary system. Albert Mangus furthered his idea in simple form. Roger Bacon expounded his astronomical system in detail. In his work, Almus Magnus, Bacon discusses Albert theory of tides. His ideas continue to diffuse in the 15th and 16th century. Copernicus cited this system in his book of Dire Revolutionaries in connection with the theories and order of inferior planets. A surface area of the moon, Marbus Nectar, is named after him. The English translation of the text, Kabbal Hammer, is edited by Goldstein and entitled The Principles on Astronomy. That's crazy. And there's two Moorish people that we named from Moorish Spain that got the surface of the moon named after him. That's some wild stuff. You know what I'm saying? This is how deep our history is going, and we're not really picking up on it. I've been rushing 1126 to 1198. He was the greatest philosopher and physician of Spain, who was born in Cordova in an illustrious family. He's appointed Cousin of Cordova and Seville, and positioned divinity second only to Caliph. He became a personal physician of the Caliph Abdul Rahman Yusuf. He was a friend of Ibn Topin. At a young age, he became well-versed in Greek sciences. He wrote 38 commentaries on various works of Aristotle, but this called the commentary. He usually wrote short jami and media time and resume, and enlarged commentary Sharim. His writings became prescribed at the University of Paris, and the intellectual movement started with him reigning a living factor in European thought until the 17th century. In 1230, his commentaries were repeatedly translated into Hebrew and Latin, which made Cordova the Athens of the West. The school of understanding Aristotle through him was known as Arabism. He was a disciple and a friend of al-Azura. He wrote astronomical, physical, and medicine also. In the book, titled The General Rules of Medicine, was translated in Latin by Bascona in 1255 in Berlin, and enjoyed a widespread reputation in printed editions of Vienna 1496, Augsburg 1519, and the Arabic text with Latin, Oxford 1778, and in French 1861. In this book, he described the real function of the retina as a photoreceptor, giving it images and transmitting to the brain. He also states that smallpox leaves immunity to those who are afflicted with it. The book deals with astronomy, drugs, food, physiology, disease, and its systems, and wrote a total of 16 works in medicine. I'm going to go back to this right quick. He also stated that smallpox leaves immunity to those who are afflicted with it. This is also going on at the same time in West Africa, where that's another connection between Moorish Spain and West Africa because they had immunity to it. They would have an inoculation system in West Africa like the Moors in Spain did. It would just give you a little bit of the smallpox. Nobody would build immunity to it. You feel me? So that was just letting you know that the Moors are African. They can try to twist and pull and all that stuff like that, but facts is facts. Even the stuff about the not to really blow up for you, but all the stuff about the astronomy stuff they talking about, and they giving the credit to the Greeks. Really, that's just all the Egyptian stuff, the ancient Egyptian stuff. But that's not here for there, but that's for another lesson. Back to the thing. In this book, the Talafuranda, innocence, coherence of coherence, was a futation from Mons Yazel to find paragraph by paragraph, expounding the beliefs and ability of the readers to understand the secrets of the universe. It was translated in Latin in 1328. In 1188, he completed a book on Muslim Islamic jurisdiction, dealing with the difference between Muslim schools and argument that they each justify their position. He fell from the Caliph race in Yoma, a solemn inquisition declared him a heretic because of his belief in eternity, predestination, and the resurrection of the body. His books were publicly burned in Seville, and he was banished from the city. He was exiled to a small place, Lucene, near Cordova. In 1195, Caliphate Abu Yaqub, son al-Mansur, ordered his books to be burnt, except his treatises on medicine, arithmetic, and astronomy. The decree later was reversed by al-Arabic Caliph of Seville, Yaqub bin Yusuf, 1186 to 1197. But he did enjoy his return to grace on 11 December 1198 in Morocco. His Arab contemporaries are preserved at the Madrid Francisco Library. His writings deeply influenced Christian as well as Jewish scholars until the 16th century. English scholar Virk was on the view of that the great Muslim wrote translation speculations whose seeds were the fruit of formation of Christendom, which almost all fell influence with Islam. Let me read it again. English scholar Virk was of the view that the great Muslim whose translations and speculations were the seed whose fruits were the reformation of Christendom was almost without influence in Islam. History of Spain, Virk, 1864, page 209. Ernest Renan, the French scholar of the 19th century, wrote much about him, and William James, the principal of psychology, supported some of his views. His commentaries opened a treasure house of Greek learning to the students of medieval Europe. Ibn Maymun, 1135-1204. He was born in Cordova and received his education from his father and Muslim teachers. At age 13, he left Spain and wandered around Morocco and Palestine and settled in 1155 in Cairo. He was the most illustrious physician and thinker of Jewish history. He wrote several books in medicine and philosophy, all Arabic. Al-Andalus, the God of the Flex, is his masterpiece, was translated to English in 1884 by Freeland. His most important treatise, the Master Treatise, is on the unity of God. He was a personal physician of Sultan Sulaiman Abim. In Cairo, he held several public offices, but never took any remuneration. He's made his living through the medical practices. Abu Jarar, 1145-1219. This distinguished geographer was born in Valencia. He made 3 trips to Mecca and Medina. He recorded his impressions in the cities of Iraq, Egypt, Syria, and Sicily in a diary, which is later puzzled as the Wallada, the Travels. His opinion was impartial. Read this brief quotation. To the east of Africa, on the side of the mainland, there's a valley in which the river flows. Between the river and the sea, there's the most beautiful plain of fine sand that can be seen anywhere. There is no racecourse that can be compared to it. On Saturday, October 6th, we embarked upon our vessel. Once embarked, trusting the will of Allah, waited for a favorable wind for the vessel to complete its cargo. Next, our journey through Syria. I've been 1165, July 23rd to 1240. He was born in Marseille and studied in North Africa in Andalus. In 1201, he went to a privilege in Mecca, privilege and spending the rest of his life in Mecca, Baghdad, and Damascus. Al-Wallada bin Arabi was one of the greatest mystical writers of the Middle Ages, with a vast literary output of 250 works. In this book, Tamarin, the itinerary of a journey, he described being a notable teacher and scholar. His tomb was enshrined in the mosque of Damascus. To his followers, he was Sheikh Abba, the Grand Master. His other noteworthy works are The Revelations of Mecca and The Visible of the Divine Wisdom, and Love Poems translated by R.A. Nicholas in 1911, London, and Ad-Din Akbar, collection of mystical poems. Others huge corpus, only 71 has been printed, 33 have been counted upon, and 16 have been translated into various languages. Martin Louis in the Sufis of Azim, 1971, page 47. One of his famous disciples was astronomer of Iran, Shana Tariz. He inspired many medieval Christian writers. He was the greatest genius of Islamic Sufism who saw the Prophet Muhammad in a vision. One of his beautiful sayings, God is unity, unity of love, of the lover and the beloved. Everyone is a wish of a union. Every love is a wish for a union. Every love, consciously or unconsciously, is love for God. The following essay explains the wonders of light. If it's not for light, nothing at all could be comprehended by the mind or the senses of the imagination. The name given to the light in the various facilities, which we also call by different names, according to the confold. The name is given to the mind, and among the nostalgics, the light of perceptions. When you apprehend what is audible, what you call light appears, which you apprehends, and hearing what you apprehends, what is visible, you call light seeing. Light involves relationships, and apprehending what is apparent. Everyone who perceives must have some relationship with the light, but it is made available to perceive everything which perceives the relationship of God. Who is light? That is all which perceive and all which is perceived. Ibn Avatar, 1197 to 1270. He was born in Malaga. He was the greatest botanist and physician in the Middle Ages. His keen student of botany, he learned the observation and experimentation. In 1219, he left Spain on a planting collection expedition. He arrived in Arabia, Syria, and Iraq, where he continued to study of plants. Among his students was outstanding historian Ibn Abdul and the author of History of 600 Physicians. He died in Damascus. His work, Amajan was a collection of simple drugs and foods, Cairo 1291. This is arranged alphabetically. He mentioned 150 Greek and Islamic officers and corrected their names and mistakes. Some 1,400 plants and minerals are described, and of which 300 are novelties. In Latin, this book was published as late as 1758 from Italy. This was a work of extraordinary observation. In fact, the greatest book in Arabic and botany. Ibn Albana was a native of Granada. He taught arithmetic, algebra, geometry, for astronomy, and a madrasa in Fez, Morocco. He wrote approximately 82 works, including the Induction of Iliad, of Euclid, a treatise on algebra, a book on astronomy, Kaba al-Ra, another one on Majan, and had an almanac. His book, Tariz, is a summary of the lost work of the 12th century mathematician al-Hazar. He wrote a treatise on the astrolabe called Safaria. Abu Khadum, 1332-1406. He was the greatest Arab historian of all times. He was born in Tunis when his family moved to Seville, Spain. He lived in Granada 1362 to 1365. During the time, he took a diplomatic mission to Christian Seville. Here he started to work on this celebrated book around the history of the world and completed the introduction in 1377. He returned to Tunis to complete his monumental work. In Egypt, he became professor and administrator of Al-Azhar University. In 1387, he was born from Hajjaj, and in 1401, he met the Mongol conqueror Tamerlane in Damascus. He died in Cairo on 17 March 1406. He is considered the founder of the science of sociology. Lissaman bin Ibn Khatib, 1313 to 1374. He was an outstanding literary figure of the 14th century. He penned some 60 works of history, geography, medicine, and philosophy. He ordered a useful biographical dictionary, and composed odes and mantra's folk songs, and a poem entitled Rahim describing the history of Islam in Spain. His history of the Granadas, al-Tariq, was published from Cairo in 1319 in 2 volumes. In the history of Granada, in the Kingdom of Granada, which he held the title of Balawun Swarm Ali Political Advisor and Advisor of the Pen. His book usually contained 2 volumes of standard works in medicine. He was the last scholar of Moorish Spain. After his death, interest in science vanishes. His work constitutes the earliest encyclopedias in the early world of letters. The Christian regarded the plague, the Black Death that ravaged Europe during the 14th century, as divine punishment. However, Ibn al-Hakam described the epidemic as a contagion in his treaty on the plague, boldly stating in the face of Christian orthodoxy, the fact that of infection becomes clear to the investigator, who knows how he established contact with the infected to get the disease, where he who is not in contact remains safe, and how transmission affected through garments, vessels, and earrings. Abu Hassan al-Ghani, 1412 to 1486. He was born in Basra. He died at Beijing, Tunis. He is best known for his advances in arithmetic and algebra. He was the last known Spanish Muslim mathematician. Several books are attributed to him. One, Algebra, is commentary on algebra, date to 1204, which gave algebraic rules in the verse. One of his arithmetical works in the commentary, the Shikin Talking, and his original works are the classification of science of arithmetic and the unveiling of the science of arithmetic. These books were in use in northern Africa for centuries. He is credited with using the algebraic symbols, equations, and finding the square root by successful approximation. He shows Arabic words and letters as symbols: WA for addition, ILLA, less subtraction, FEE for multiplication, ALA over division. And he used letters J, Jaru, SH, Shane, P for X, M for X2, and K for X3, and double M for X4. Now, that's just one part of it, because this list goes on and on and on. But we're going to do a short part 2 of this, because I've been talking for a while about this. But also, y'all understand with all the astrolabs, I'm going to close it out right here, and I'll come back to a different video on this one. But y'all got to understand with the astrolabs and all that stuff, they're talking about Moorish Spain. We was already floating boats. We already had corn in Spain, Africa, and all that stuff. Corn came from Mexico. We was floating boats. We had astrolabs. We was doing trigonometry on a high scale, spherical trig. Now, and this one shows to give all the props to the Greeks. But if you read Stolen Legacy, most of these questions you can find that they're giving George G.M. James Stolen Legacy, the Honorable George G.M. James Stolen Legacy. Most of these questions they're talking about is found in Stolen Legacy. And that's part of the initiate school of the Egyptian mystery system. So this is what it was passed down. That's how they were so swift and so sly. That's how they was able to beat the plague and things of that nature. Anyway, this is a Koski Fun Day. I know it's a long video, but gotta get it out. And if you get an opportunity, just pause the video and look through some of the authors and stuff like that, as in the people I named off and the works they did. How Copernicus' whole style just came from them, which makes sense because they were just, in Europe, it was kind of messed up at the time. So to hit that Renaissance, they had to copy the springboard off somebody else. Anywho, this is a Koski Fun Day. Much love. Subscribe to the channel and donate to the moment. A Koski Fun Day Cash App. Peace.